Thank you, first of all, Heather and crew, Joanne, Terry, Marcia, for organizing this. And thank you, Preston. That was some really intuitive stuff. And hopefully what I'm going to speak on is just going to affirm the process stuff that Preston touched on. So I'm here from Johnstown, Pennsylvania. As Heather said earlier this evening, I am an architect, planner, developer, project guy, currently involved in a number of projects, but the bulk of my work right now is in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which is about 2-hour drive southeast of where we are today. And Johnstown's a really interesting community because it's exactly where you guys are now, just a few years in the future. So it's really exciting for me to be here and engage with a community that's just beginning that process. Just as a precursor to this kind of stuff, when I drove in from Johnstown this morning, drove up through Pittsburgh, of course, one of the greatest cities on earth, and then turned north and drove for 15, 20 minutes till I got to the Beaver County line. And then I had a little bit of time to explore the county a little bit. And I drove up the highway through these really beautiful, picturesque, rural, forested mountains, and then had some time to drive around some of the towns along the Allegheny River. Really beautiful, walkable, compact towns that are all knitted together by this wonderful resource in the Allegheny. So I hope that everyone here just recognizes the opportunity that you have as a community ahead of you. Beaver River? Is that what it is? Whatever river it is. I'm not too familiar with this part of the world, so I defer to you on the river. So I'm going to talk about this stuff a little bit. I have worked with a lot of communities on a lot of very difficult things. And I've helped communities all across the world answer some very challenging questions and work through some very tough problems, everything from questions about land use and public space to sustainable economic planning to social justice and equitable wealth. And every community works through the process a little bit differently. Every community needs to discover that process for itself. But in my work, there's been one constant with all of this visioning stuff, and that is this. This stuff is hard. This is not easy. Getting together and talking through some of these really tough challenges requires different interests, different personalities, competing points of view that aren't necessarily right and wrong, black and white, but different shades of gray. And it's really tough stuff. So I want to applaud everyone here for just being present and participating. That tells me that everyone's here is invested and kind of wants to see this move. So this is tough, but I'm going to hopefully give you some tips to make the process of moving from idea to action a little bit easier. And we're going to do this in 10 minutes or less. So this picture I love up here, this is two young men, or young man and a young woman, who are really excited because they just planted a bunch of crops during springtime in some community gardens. And not a difficult project to actually put on the ground, right? I could get a crew of people out here and build these big wooden boxes in a day and call that my community garden. The tough part is getting young people like this or old people or whomever really invested in this kind of thing. And if you look to the top right of that picture, there's a big, ugly building, and that is in this particular community, that's Section 8 housing. So a population that's not necessarily may not be the most educated, may not necessarily have the best access to resources, may not understand this kind of stuff, but by working with that community and bringing resources here, you can create something really spectacular at a small scale. So step number one, part of why we're here tonight, define the vision. And we're going to do a group exercise a little bit later. But essentially, the first step of any development action is to define what you're after. And so that begins with a vision statement. And a vision statement exists, starts with brainstorming, ends somewhere as a roadmap for future activity. Here's how the US government defines vision statements: as a one-sentence statement describing the clear and inspirational long-term desired change resulting from an organization's work. So a little bit of a mouthful, but vision statements, they're not action plans. They're not long documents. They're just statements. Should be clear, concise, straightforward, easy to understand, easy to support, easy to get behind. Average length, 15 words or less. And they should be simultaneously firm and solid, but also unwavering to a certain extent. I'm going to look at a couple vision statements that I really like. Feeding America, 3 words. The vision statement for this organization, 3 words: a hunger-free America. Pretty easy to understand, right? Pretty direct. But it tells you something about the people and the programs and the network behind this particular organization if you've never been made aware of them before. Another one a bit longer, Special Olympics. We all know sort of what the Special Olympics does, but their mission statement: to transform communities by inspiring people throughout the world to open their minds, accept and include people with intellectual disabilities, and thereby anyone who is perceived as different. A little bit longer, but equally as impactful and equally as direct vision statement. The place where I do most of my work right now, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, has this as its vision statement. And at the tables there are some booklets. I took this straight from the back cover of those booklets. But this took many, many hours, many meetings, and literally hundreds of people to boil down what the community of Johnstown is after into 3 or 4 statements. Step number 2, gather the stakeholders, which is sort of where we are today, I think. This can concurrently happen with defining the vision, but you need to know who needs to be involved with a project, right? You know what you want. You need to figure out who should be involved. And so just getting people together to connect, to talk about challenges in a non-committal way is pretty important in the process. And I get this question a lot. What's the difference between the people in a room, like everybody here, versus a steering committee? And who should be on my steering committee? It can't be 50 people, it can't be 100 people. Who should be on the steering committee? And I can't answer that. And I don't think anybody here is prepared to answer that kind of stuff. But if you ask some of these questions, I can guarantee you'll begin to think of people who should be involved in projects. So ask things like, who's already involved in an effort? Who's not, but needs to be? Who needs to have a voice in the process? Who has a passion about this stuff? Who has a stake? Who can get things done? Who can challenge the status quo? Step number 3, we have a vision. We've gathered the players. We need to know what resources are available to move a project forward. And I can guarantee that any community in Beaver County has some of these resources already at hand. They might just need to be discovered. When I started Vision 25 about 2 years ago, these are the 5 resources that we said were available to some of our initial project teams, and we now have dozens and dozens of resources behind them. But just things like process books, strategy guides, some literature and collateral stuff to help teams think through how they're supposed to function. Very, very important. We had a pretty sophisticated marketing strategy right off the bat that we could tell teams, hey, come work through the vision process and we can get you into the newspaper or on TV or whatever. That kind of stuff's also important for people to see the fruits of their labor in a way that's appreciable. Cash, of course, we have a mini grant program, worked with a local foundation to give $500, $1,000 away to anybody that came to us with an idea and could demonstrate why that idea would be successful. On the table is also some cards about that program. And on the far left there, 2 pretty attractive gentlemen, myself and my colleague, on-the-ground people who are in place within a community, not to dictate, but to help connect and help support projects and help get things done. And then I make all of my teams do this wherever I work. Develop a plan so that you can take your vision statement, expand it a little bit, and know what your steps are. This is not intended to be homework, right? This is not a 10-page business plan necessarily, at least to start. This is a one-page template to help teams think through who they are, what they're after, what success looks like, how they're gonna work towards a goal. And that's important because it just helps people understand what their intentions are. And then finally, celebrate success. And I cannot overstate this one. I like to do parties and events and community gathering type stuff every week if I can. But here's one example of a place in Maryland that I work. Middle of last year, just brought the community together and said, hey, we're gonna have a party. We're gonna invite some speakers, invite some of the teams that are involved in the process to get up on stage. We'll serve beer. We'll get people together to chat and to network, and we'll just celebrate as a community the things that we're doing. And then may be a little bit hard to read, but just to summarize this a little bit. So you have an idea, great. What's that mean? Well, you need to go and get some other people involved, right? Figure out who the players are that can drive your idea. Figure out if it's an idea that's worth driving. Build an action plan around that. Put a vision statement together. Come up with some steps. Put it through the grinder a little bit. Figure out some other resources within the community. Talk to more people. Get your action plan submitted into the hands of somebody who can help you. On the ground people, political people, representatives, whatever. And then get to work. Go, go, go. Action, support, and implement. And then down here, celebrate. Okay, I have just a few minutes left. I'm going to talk about Vision 2025 because I think that's why Heather invited me to come here. Pretty cool initiative going on in Johnstown. We're about 4 years into our process, and that's 2 years of planning and fundraising and visualizing, and then for the past 2 years, I've been in place in the community to help implement. Vision 25 started because the community reached a point where disinvestment had occurred for so long that it was faced with how it plans for its own growth and development from the bottom up, from a grassroots level. So went out, put a steering committee together for the whole project, latched on to the name Vision 2025, looking 10 years into the future, went out and hired some pretty zippy people from Carnegie Mellon University to put together a plan, and then got straight into implementing. Again, hard to read, but we're essentially working here in the crux of 3 main areas, which all sits on good governance of the project and the framework. So we're really focused on making Johnstown a vibrant community socially through civic engagement means, through neighborhood development, that kind of stuff. Strong sense of community. Second stool of the 3-legged stool is vibrant and open local economy. That's getting more business into the community, having teams work on entrepreneurial endeavors, local economic stuff, all of that kind of stuff that Preston touched upon. And then the third is vibrant and life-sustainable landscapes, preserving our architecture and our sense of place, as well as our natural resources. So we've been here in Johnstown about 2 years implementing, have about 1,000 people involved on about 30 different project teams, and have been pretty successful in the community. Really like this image. This is a little bit about how we work. An infographic, again, good governance sits at the center of this. We have a pretty significant steering committee of local business and political leaders that supports us. We have these 3 circles of project clusters. You can see how everything sort of is connected together as each of these circles, which could represent a team or a project or whatever, as new projects come into the fold, circle gets bigger, things begin to connect, make more sense, and then everything spins and feeds off of itself for the greater good of the community. When Johnstown was going through its visioning process, these were some of the big priorities that this community discovered and wanted to work on. Probably some of these are familiar to Beaver County folks, but blight and vacancy and land use and that kind of stuff. Multimodal transportation planning, really big issue. Neighborhood development. River and water stuff. That's access, sustainability, environment, riverfront economic activity, and then the green urban stuffs, community gardens, and so forth. And then my last slide, we have, again, about 1,000 people involved in Johnstown in Vision 2025, about 30 teams that come and go depending on seasonality and what they're working on and that kind of stuff, but about 30 teams. And teams that I'm really impressed by and proud of. And again, I don't control what the teams work on. That's up to the community. I'm just there to provide support. But if a week goes by in Cambria County without one of the Vision teams getting into the media somehow, I am surprised. And this is just one day. This was like a Wednesday in July. 3 different media sources, 3 different Vision 2025 teams that all got into the media on the same day. So this is the Tribune Democrat, which is the newspaper of record in Johnstown, and this was half of the front page of the Tribune. One of our teams, which was interested in using art as a social and economic catalyst, went to this historic set of stairs, which are probably pretty familiar looking to Pittsburgh folks, and painted a mural on them and got into the newspaper. At the same time, one of the smaller papers, smaller than the Tribune, published a pretty cool story about the community gardens folks and some of the work that they were working on. And then WTAJ, CBS affiliate out of Altoona that runs in Johnstown, published a story on this guy who was working with us to develop an entrepreneurial co-working and incubating space downtown, the first of its kind in Johnstown. So social, community stuff, environmental, and business all interlinked. Thank you.